A lone runner carries the Olympic torch through a roaring stadium. This global ritual, however, begins not with a flame, but with a single dusty footrace in a sacred valley over 2,700 years ago. We are traveling back to ancient Greece to untangle an epic origin story woven from both hard history and wild mythology. By the end of this journey, you will know the true story of how the Olympics were born, from divine battles to deadly chariot races. We will uncover why a simple olive wreath was worth dying for, and how a sacred truce stopped all wars. What does the ultimate test of human strength tell you about the society that created it? That single dusty footrace in the sacred valley of Olympia has a date we can point to, the year 776 before the Common Era. This was not just the first Olympic Games, it was year one for the ancient Greeks themselves. They marked their entire history from this moment, a new calendar beginning with the victory of one man, a cook from the nearby city of Ilys named Coroibos. The event was the stadion, a sprint the length of the stadium, a distance of about 192 meters. Think of the sheer simplicity of it. One race, one winner, and a stadium that was little more than a packed earth track flanked by grassy slopes for spectators. There were no grand marble temples yet, no colossal statue of Zeus. The glory was in the act itself, a pure, explosive test of speed dedicated to the king of the gods. For his victory, Coroibos received no gold medal. His prize was a simple crown woven from the branches of a wild olive tree, a humble object that held more value than any treasure. This single race established a pattern that would last for centuries, a celebration where human excellence became a form of devotion, and where a man could achieve a kind of immortality through the power of his own 2 feet. But that first footrace was more than a sporting event, it was the seed of a radical idea. For the honor of Zeus, all conflict across the war-torn Greek world had to cease. A sacred peace was declared, known as the Ekecheiria or the Olympic Truce. Messengers called spondophoroi would fan out from Olympia in every direction, their voices carrying the proclamation across mountains and seas. From the moment the truce began, all hostilities between the perpetually quarreling city-states were suspended. Armies were forbidden to march, legal disputes were put on hold, and the death penalty was postponed. For the duration of the Games and for the travel period on either side, the entire Greek world was to be at peace. Imagine a Spartan soldier and an Athenian athlete walking the same road, not as enemies, but as fellow pilgrims heading to the same sacred ground. This was the truce's profound purpose, to forge a temporary Panhellenic unity, a shared Greek identity that rose above local squabbles. The consequences for breaking this sacred peace were severe and terrifying. Any city-state that dared to attack a traveler or mobilize its army during the truce would face total exclusion from the Games. Worse, they would be levied with heavy fines and could even face a unified military response from the other Greek states. To violate the truce was to insult Zeus himself, and no king or general was willing to risk that divine wrath. This was not a suggestion, it was the law of the gods, and for over 1,000 years it held fast. The truce guaranteed that the journey to Olympia was safe, transforming the Games into a true melting pot of Greek culture, where the only battles fought were on the sacred track. This sanctuary of Olympia was far more than a simple stadium. It was a sprawling religious complex, a city of the gods nestled in a sacred grove, where every tree, every altar, and every building pulsed with divine presence. The athletic events were the spectacular climax, but the true purpose of the place was worship. At its heart stood the immense temple of Zeus, a monument so grand it defined the very skyline. Its towering columns of local shellstone, once coated in bright white stucco, supported a roof adorned with sculpted scenes of mythological battles, but the true wonder lay inside. Here, in the dim, incense-heavy air, sat the colossal statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Crafted by the legendary sculptor Phidias in his nearby workshop, the statue was a breathtaking sight. Zeus, the king of the gods, was enthroned in majesty, his body made of ivory and his robes of gleaming gold. In his right hand he held a life-size statue of the goddess Nike, symbolizing victory, and in his left a magnificent scepter topped with an eagle. The scale was almost beyond comprehension. Ancient writers claimed that if the god were to stand, he would lift the very roof off the temple. This was not merely a piece of art, it was a religious icon, the spiritual anchor for the entire Olympic festival. Just a short walk from this divine grandeur lay the stark, human-scaled reality of the stadium itself. The track was a simple strip of packed earth, about 192 meters long, with starting lines of stone slabs. There were no seats for the common spectator. The crowd, tens of thousands strong, would pack the surrounding grassy banks, their cheers echoing across the valley. Nearby, the hippodrome stretched out, a vast field for the chariot races, events of such danger and prestige they could make or break the fortunes of entire city-states. Every 4 years, this sacred ground transformed. The quiet, religious sanctuary became a vibrant, noisy, and overwhelming city of tents, where athletes, artists, politicians, and philosophers all mingled under the watchful eyes of the gods. The games were the main event, but the entire experience was a profound declaration of what it meant to be Greek. Yet the very ground on which this peace was forged was born from a war of cosmic proportions. Long before the first athlete set foot in the valley, Olympia was a stage for the ultimate divine conflict, a battle that decided the fate of the universe. The official myth tells us the Olympic Games were founded by Zeus himself to celebrate his most monumental victory. He had just overthrown his father, the Titan Cronus, in a brutal, decade-long war known as the Titanomachy. This was not merely a family squabble, it was a cataclysmic struggle for the throne of creation. Cronus, fearing a prophecy that he would be overthrown by his own child, had devoured each of his children at birth. But his wife Rhea, desperate to save her youngest, Zeus, tricked him by handing him a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes to swallow instead. The infant god was secretly raised in a cave on Crete, and when he came of age, he returned to challenge his father. He forced Cronus to disgorge his siblings, and together, this new generation of gods, the Olympians, waged a terrible war against the old Titans. The final, decisive battle was said to have been fought right there in the plains of Olympia. Upon his victory, Zeus claimed dominion over the sky and the earth, establishing a new world order. To commemorate his triumph and honor his father, for even gods honor their predecessors, he ordained the first games at that very site. The very first event was a simple footrace between his divine brothers, Apollo and Hermes, with Apollo taking the victory. This divine origin story infused the games with their foundational purpose. They were not just an athletic contest, they were a reenactment of the struggle for cosmic order, a celebration of victory snatched from the jaws of chaos, and a perpetual offering to the king who ruled from the sky. Every 4 years, when the athletes gathered, they were stepping onto a battlefield where the gods themselves had fought, competing not just for personal glory, but to reaffirm the very order of the world that Zeus had established. But the story of Zeus battling the Titans is not the only myth that claims the origin of the games. Another, far more human and morally complex tale, centers on a prince named Pelops, a story of love, betrayal, and a deadly chariot race that stained the soil of Olympia with treachery long before it was packed down for a running track. This legend tells of King Oenomaus, who ruled the land of Pisa near Olympia. He had a beautiful daughter, Hippodamia, and a terrible prophecy haunted him. It foretold that he would be killed by his own son-in-law. To prevent this fate, the king devised a gruesome contest for any suitor who sought his daughter's hand. The challenger would have to take Hippodamia in his chariot and race the king from Olympia to the Isthmus of Corinth. If the suitor won, he would get the princess and the kingdom. If he lost, he would die, for Oenomaus followed close behind, armed with a spear, and had already defeated and killed 13 previous princes. The king knew he could not lose because his team of divine horses were a gift from his father, the god Ares, making them faster than any mortal steeds. Into this deadly arena stepped the hero Pelops. He was not foolish, and he knew he could not win a fair race, so he resorted to cunning. Some versions say he prayed to his former lover, the god Poseidon, who gave him a golden chariot and immortal horses. But the more dramatic and darker version involves sabotage. Pelops went to the king's charioteer, a man named Myrtilus, and promised him a night with Hippodamia and half the kingdom if he would help them win. Myrtilus, tempted by the offer, agreed to betray his king. On the night before the race, the charioteer secretly replaced the bronze linchpins that held the wheels on the king's chariot with ones made of wax. The next day, the race began. Pelops and Hippodamia raced for their lives, with Oenomaus thundering behind, closing in for the kill. Just as the king was about to thrust his spear, the wax linchpins melted under the strain and the heat. The wheels flew off, the chariot shattered, and Oenomaus was dragged to his death by his own divine horses, tragically fulfilling the very prophecy he had sought to avoid. Pelops had won, but his treachery was not complete. To cover his tracks, he later murdered the charioteer, Myrtilus, by throwing him into the sea. As he drowned, Myrtilus cursed the entire line of Pelops, a curse that would haunt his descendants for generations, sparking the events of many famous Greek tragedies. Despite this dark beginning, Pelops established funeral games to honor the dead king Oenomaus and to purify himself of the murder. According to this local legend, these funeral games were the true precursor to the Olympic Games, founded not by a god to celebrate cosmic order, but by a flawed man to atone for a terrible crime. This story presents a very different origin, one rooted in human ambition, deceit, and the quest for redemption. It asks a profound question: was the glory of Olympia built on divine victory or on mortal sin? The ancient Greeks seemed to hold both truths in their minds at once, understanding that their greatest institutions could be born from both the heavens above and the flawed, striving hearts of humanity below. Yet another legend credits the mighty Heracles with founding the Games, a story that connects the Olympics directly to the most famous labors in all of mythology. After the demigod completed his fifth labor, a task that involved cleaning the immense Orgion stables in a single day, he felt the need to express his gratitude to his father, Zeus. The stables, which had not been cleaned in 30 years, were a monument to filth, and Heracles had only triumphed by rerouting 2 entire rivers through them. To celebrate this monumental feat of strength and ingenuity, he decided to clear a sacred grove at Olympia and stage athletic contests in honor of Zeus. It was Heracles, the myth says, who first paced out the length of the stadion, the original footrace, defining the very track that would be used for centuries. He did not stop there. He is credited with personally introducing several of the core Olympic events, shaping the Games into the spectacle we recognize. He established the pancration, a brutal, no-holds-barred combination of wrestling and boxing where the only rules were no biting and no gouging of eyes. He brought in wrestling, that pure test of strength and leverage, and the heavyweight boxing match where fighters wrapped their hands in leather straps. But his most enduring contribution might have been the prize itself. The story goes that Heracles journeyed to the mystical land of the Hyperboreans, a paradise beyond the north wind, and there he found the sacred wild olive tree. He brought back a cutting and planted it in the sacred grove at Olympia. From its branches he personally wove the very first victor's crown, the Kotinos. This simple wreath of intertwined olive leaves was the only prize an Olympic champion would ever receive. Yet in the hands of Heracles it was transformed. It was no longer just a plant, it was a direct gift from a demigod, a symbol of divine favor and immortal glory. In this version of the myth, the games are not born from cosmic war or mortal treachery, but from a son's gratitude, a hero's strength, and the creation of a prize that would become more precious than any amount of gold. While Heracles established individual contests of raw power, the ancient Greeks also created the ultimate trial of all-around excellence, the pentathlon. This was not a test of one singular skill, but a grueling examination of 5 distinct disciplines, designed to crown the most complete athlete in all of Greece. The event was a symphony of contrasting abilities, demanding the explosive speed of a sprinter, the ballistic precision of a thrower, the soaring grace of a jumper, and the gritty endurance of a wrestler. Victory here meant more than just being the strongest or the fastest. It meant you were the most perfectly balanced, the truest embodiment of the ideal Greek citizen soldier. The 5 events unfolded in a specific, relentless order, beginning with the foundation of all athletic competition. First was the stadion, the same simple footrace that started the entire Olympic tradition. This 200-meter sprint was the purest measure of speed, a burst of energy that set the tone for the entire competition. A poor showing here could shatter an athlete's confidence before the more technical events even began. Next came the long jump, but this was nothing like the running leap we see today. The ancient Greek jumper performed his feat with weights in each hand called halters. These were not mere decorations, they were clever tools made of stone or lead, shaped like telephone receivers. The athlete would swing these weights backward and forward to build momentum before launching himself into the air. At the peak of his jump, he would violently thrust his arms forward, using the weights to propel his body just a little farther. It was a feat of physics as much as physiology, combining rhythm, coordination, and raw leg power. The third event shifted the focus from the athlete's own body to his ability to project an object through space, the discus throw. The discus was a heavy stone or bronze plate, weighing as much as 2 modern bags of flour. The thrower would spin within a small, designated area, building centrifugal force before releasing the heavy disc in a smooth, flat arc. This required immense core strength, balance, and impeccable timing. A single misstep could send the discus veering wildly off course, costing the athlete precious points. Following the discus was the javelin throw, an event with the most direct and obvious connection to the battlefield. The javelin was a man-sized spear, but the Greek athletes used a clever leather thong called an ankylo. They would loop this thong around the shaft, hooking it with 2 fingers. When they threw, the unwinding thong acted like a sling, imparting a powerful spin that stabilized the javelin in flight and dramatically increased its range and accuracy. This was the skill of a hunter and a warrior transformed into an art form. If an athlete managed to excel in these first 4 diverse events, he then faced the final and most decisive challenge, wrestling. The pentathlon's wrestling match was likely a single, continuous elimination bout, a brutal test of endurance after a day of exhaustive competition. Here, in the dust and the sweat, speed and throwing power meant little if a man lacked the grappling skill and sheer fortitude to force his opponent to the ground 3 times. This final event was the great equalizer, where a wrestler who had merely survived the earlier rounds could potentially triumph over a more versatile opponent. To win the pentathlon, an athlete had to be a master of every discipline. He couldn't afford to be just a runner or just a wrestler. He had to be both, and a jumper and a thrower as well. This made the pentathlon victor the most respected champion at the Games, the living ideal of a balanced mind in a balanced body. His victory proved he was ready for anything, whether on the sacred track of Olympia or the chaotic front lines of a phalanx. Yet for all the raw athleticism of the pentathlon, no event at the ancient Olympics could match the sheer spectacle, the deafening roar, or the lethal danger of the chariot race. This was the grand finale, the premier event that drew the largest crowds and carried the highest stakes. The hippodrome was a vast, open plain, its track stretching nearly 1,400 meters in length, a chaotic whirlwind of dust, sweat, and splintering wood. Unlike the individual athletes, the charioteer was not the star. He was often a hired hand, a skilled servant or a slave. The true competitor, the one who financed the entire extravagant enterprise, was the owner of the horses and chariot, a wealthy aristocrat or even a ruling king. A single racing team required a fortune, the best horses bred from places like Thessaly or Sicily, a lightweight chariot built for speed, and a full support crew. This made the race the ultimate display of private wealth and political power, a way for the elite to compete for glory without ever setting foot on the track. The race itself was a terrifying ballet of chaos. Teams of 4 horses, or sometimes 2, were hitched to flimsy wooden chariots, little more than a platform on wheels with a waist-high rail for the driver to brace against. There were no lanes, no banked turns, just a simple starting gate made of ropes that dropped to unleash a thundering mass of horseflesh and machinery. The drivers, standing precariously in their chariots, would wrap the reins around their waists to better control their teams, a decision that turned every sharp turn into a potential death sentence. If a chariot overturned, which happened with horrifying frequency, the driver would be dragged behind his own panicked horses, his only hope a small knife he carried to cut himself free in the split second before he was crushed or trampled. The most dangerous point was the turn around the post at each end of the track. Here, the entire pack would converge, drivers whipping their horses and leaning into the curve, wheels locking and chariots shattering into kindling. The poet Pindar vividly described the wreckage, the groans of dying men, and the broken chariots littering the track like scattered toys. Survival was as much a victory as winning. And when the dust settled and one team emerged triumphant, the herald would announce the name of the victor. It was not the driver, battered and bleeding, who stepped forward to receive the sacred olive wreath. The crown went to the owner, the man who had bankrolled the victory from the safety of the stands. This was the stark reality of the game's most prestigious event. It was a brutal demonstration that in the ancient world, supreme glory could be bought, and the highest honors were reserved not for the man who risked his life, but for the man who could afford to pay for it. The thunderous roar that greeted the chariot race was matched only by the raw, primal energy of the stadium for the pancration. If the chariot race was about aristocratic spectacle, this was something far more visceral, a contest that stripped combat down to its brutal essence. Pancration, a name meaning all power, was exactly that. It was a savage fusion of boxing and wrestling where nearly every technique was permitted. Fighters could punch, kick, choke, and apply joint-locking holds designed to snap limbs. The only rules were 2 simple prohibitions: no biting and no gouging of eyes. Beyond that, the arena was a canvas for controlled violence, a test to see which man could endure the most pain or force his opponent to submit. There were no rounds, no weight classes, and no time limits. The fight ended only when one man raised his finger in surrender or was rendered unconscious or in some cases dead. Victory demanded a terrifying combination of a boxer's striking power, a wrestler's grappling skill, and a street brawler's ruthless ingenuity. This was not a game, it was a war for 2 men. One of the most legendary stories to emerge from this brutal arena is that of Ehician of Phegalia, a man whose name became synonymous with an impossible victory. During the finals of the pancration, Ehician found himself caught in a desperate situation. His opponent had locked him in a powerful chokehold from behind, squeezing the air from his lungs. As the crowd watched, Ehician's face began to turn purple from lack of air. He was seconds from blacking out, moments from defeat, but surrender was not in his nature. With his last shred of consciousness, he did not try to pry the arms from his neck, a futile effort. Instead, he launched a final, cunning act of defiance. He lunged forward, grabbing his opponent's ankle and twisting it with all his remaining strength. The sudden, excruciating pain in his foot caused the other fighter to jerk his arm in a reflexive spasm, a momentary loosening of the chokehold just enough for him to flash the surrender signal. In that exact same instant, the torque of a Hessian's body as he wrenched the ankle broke his own neck. The judges declared a Hessian the victor, for his opponent had submitted. They carried his lifeless body from the stadium, already crowned with the olive wreath. He was a champion in death, a man who chose a glorious end over a dishonorable surrender. His statue was erected in his hometown, forever capturing the moment of his final, fatal struggle. The story of a Hessian was the ultimate expression of the pancratian spirit, where the will to win was so absolute it could transcend even death itself. The path to becoming an Olympic champion began not in the stadium, but in the gritty, unglamorous world of the wrestling school, the palestra. Here, under the harsh Greek sun, boys were forged into athletes through a regimen of brutal simplicity and relentless repetition. Their training was a full-time occupation, funded by their families or wealthy patrons who saw a potential victory as a source of immense civic pride. A typical day started at dawn with a coating of olive oil rubbed over the entire body, followed by a dusting of fine sand or powder to provide a better grip. The air would be thick with the scent of sweat and earth, the sounds of slapping flesh and grunting men echoing off the colonnaded walls. They practiced their disciplines for hours on end, runners sprinting on makeshift tracks, discus throwers perfecting their spin, and boxers pummeling leather sacks filled with sand or fig seeds. But the core of their physical conditioning was the gymnasium itself, a place for gymnosine to exercise naked. They lifted heavy stones and weights, they ran in full armor to build endurance, and they practiced the complex movements of the pentathlon until their bodies moved with unconscious precision. Their diet was as austere as their training. Unlike the meat-heavy diets of mythic heroes like Heracles, these historical athletes primarily subsisted on barley bread, cheese, figs, and a special energy cake made from wheat, honey, and nuts. They believed that a simple, grain-based diet produced lean, hard muscle, unlike the softer flesh of the wealthy elite who could afford lavish meals. This entire life of discipline was aimed at a single, fleeting moment that occurred just once every 4 years, a chance to prove that their sacrifice was worth the ultimate prize. For the few who triumphed, the humble olive wreath was merely the beginning of their reward. The true glory awaited them at home. A returning Olympic champion was not just an athlete, he was a living god among men. His victory parade would be the grandest event his city-state had ever seen. The walls of the city were sometimes torn down to make a new, grander entrance for him, a symbolic gesture declaring that a town which produced such a man needed no physical defenses. He was granted the ultimate honor, sightsees, the right to free meals for life at the city's expense, served in the prestigious town hall alongside generals and politicians. Massive cash bonuses, often amounting to a lifetime's earnings for a common man, were poured upon him. Statues were carved in his likeness and erected in the most sacred spaces, ensuring his face and name would be remembered for generations. In a world constantly shadowed by war, an Olympic victory was a different kind of conquest. It brought a permanent, shining prestige to his entire community, proving that their people, their customs, and their gods could produce the finest man in all of Greece. The athlete who once trained in dusty obscurity now dined with kings, his simple wreath transformed into a key that unlocked a life of immortal honor and legendary status. But for every athlete straining for glory, there were thousands more who came simply to witness, to be part of the spectacle. The Valley of Olympia swelled into a temporary metropolis, a chaotic and vibrant tent city housing over 40,000 souls. The air itself changed, thick with the smoke of countless campfires, the scent of roasting meat from food vendors, and the excited buzz of a dozen different Greek dialects colliding. This was not a quiet, solemn religious retreat. It was a 5-day carnival, a sprawling festival of humanity dedicated to the gods. You would find no grand hotels or stone amphitheaters for this crowd. Spectators slept under the stars or in makeshift shelters of wool and leather, their temporary homes sprawling across the sacred plain. merchants hawked their wares from simple stalls, selling everything from wine and sausages to commemorative trinkets and miniature statues of Zeus. The atmosphere was electric, a mixture of pious reverence and raw, unadulterated excitement. Between the athletic events, the crowd did not simply disperse. This was the prime opportunity for poets to recite their latest odes to victorious athletes, for musicians to perform, and for philosophers to gather their students for impromptu lectures under the shade of an olive tree. Famous thinkers like Plato and Aristotle were known to walk these grounds, using the games as a living classroom to discuss ethics, politics, and the nature of excellence. Politicians and diplomats from warring city-states would meet in this neutral territory, forging alliances and negotiating treaties under the protection of the sacred truce. For a few precious days, the entire intellectual, political, and social life of Greece was concentrated in this one valley. The roar of the crowd for a favorite chariot team was as much a part of the Olympic experience as the silent prayer at the altar of Zeus. It was a world of stark contrasts where the sacred and the profane, the brutal and the beautiful, existed side by side, all united by a shared sense of identity and a collective thirst for glory. Yet this vibrant world of male competition existed behind a forbidden wall for half the population. The Olympic Games themselves were an exclusively male domain, a sacred space where women, particularly married women, were not only barred from competing but were also forbidden from watching the spectacles under penalty of death. According to the ancient writer Pausanias, any woman caught sneaking into the men's games would be thrown from a nearby cliff. This harsh rule was rooted in the game's nature as a religious festival for Zeus, a celebration of male physicality and virility performed in the nude, a space considered inappropriate for the female gaze. But to assume that ancient Greek women had no place in the athletic world would be a profound mistake. Just a short walk from the roaring men's stadium, another sacred competition was held, one dedicated to the queen of the gods herself. Every 4 years, on a track laid out before the ancient temple of Hera, young women gathered for their own Olympic event, the Heracles Games. This was not a smaller, less important version of the men's festival. It was a distinct and deeply respected tradition with its own history and purpose, celebrating the power and grace of the female form in honor of Zeus's wife, Hera. The competitors were unmarried girls divided into 3 age categories, much like our modern youth sports. Their single event was a footrace, a sprint that was slightly shorter than the men's stadion, perhaps 160 meters or roughly 5/6 of the length. They did not run naked like the men, but competed in a unique and practical outfit. Each runner wore a short chiton, a tunic that would be fastened at the shoulders but was open along the sides, leaving the right shoulder and breast bare for freedom of movement. Their long, unbound hair would stream behind them as they ran, a powerful image of youthful vigor and beauty. The prize for the victors was a tangible symbol of their achievement and a direct parallel to the men's olive wreath. They received a crown woven from the sacred olive branches of the wild olive tree, just like the men, and they were also given a portion of a cow which had been sacrificed to Hera. This meat was a valuable and sacred offering, connecting their physical victory directly to the divine. Most significantly, a statue of each winner was commissioned, paid for by their families, and erected at the sanctuary. The bases of these statues, some inscribed with the girls' names and their fathers' names, have been found by archaeologists, providing hard evidence of this long-overlooked female tradition. The Heracles Games were more than just a sporting event, they were a crucial rite of passage. For these young women, competing and winning was a public demonstration of their physical fitness and readiness for marriage and motherhood, qualities highly prized in a society that valued strong heirs. The Games were organized and run by a committee of 16 women from the city of Elis, the same body that managed other important rituals for Hera, giving women a rare and formal role in the administration of a major Panhellenic festival. The existence of the Heracles reveals a complex truth about the ancient Greek world. While women were excluded from the primary Olympic stage, their own athleticism was not suppressed, but rather channeled into a separate, sacred space, celebrating Hera's power and the vital role of women in ensuring the health and continuity of the city-state itself. This sacred competition demanded absolute integrity, enforced by a group of men as disciplined as the athletes themselves, the Hellenodikai. These were not mere referees but high-ranking aristocrats and priests selected from the leading families of Elis, the city-state that presided over the games. Their authority was absolute, their word final and beyond appeal. To prepare for this immense responsibility, these judges underwent a brutal 10-month training program at a special facility called the Hellenodikaion. Here, they were drilled in the intricate rules of every event, from the precise starting positions for the foot races to the complex scoring of the pentathlon. They studied the sacred laws of the Olympic Truce and practiced the elaborate religious rituals they would have to perform. This was a boot camp for arbiters of divine will, forging them into a unified body whose judgment would be unquestioned. Their physical presence was meant to command respect, clad in regal purple robes, and they held the power to disqualify any athlete, fine any city-state, or overturn any result they deemed unjust. On the day of the competitions, they were everywhere, their watchful eyes scanning for any infraction, their stern presence a constant reminder that the games were about honor, not just victory. The penalties for breaking this sacred trust were severe, public, and designed to scar a cheater's legacy for all time. An athlete caught bribing an opponent, attempting to sabotage a rival, or simply starting before the signal faced an immediate and humiliating disqualification. But the punishment did not end there. The Hellenodikai would levy a heavy financial fine, a sum so substantial it served as a powerful deterrent to any would-be cheat. This money, however, was not absorbed by the state. It was put to a purpose that turned individual shame into a permanent public monument. The fines were used to commission bronze statues of Zeus, known as Zanes, from the finest sculptors of the age. These were not triumphant images of the god, but solemn, almost accusatory figures. They were erected on marble bases lining the entrance to the stadium's vaulted tunnel, the very path every single athlete had to walk to reach the sacred track. Imagine the psychological weight of that walk. A young runner, his heart pounding with nervous excitement, would pass by a dozen or more of these gleaming statues, and on the base of each he would read an inscription naming the cheater, his father's name, and his city-state. It was a gallery of infamy, a stark, unavoidable lesson in the cost of dishonor. These Zanes stood for centuries, a silent army of Zeus bearing witness. They served as a constant, chilling reminder that while a victor's glory was immortal, so too was a cheater's shame. To have your name and your city's reputation permanently branded on the path to glory was a fate considered worse than any physical defeat. It taught every competitor and every spectator a fundamental truth of the games, that how you competed mattered far more than whether you won. That simple crown of twisted olive leaves carried a weight no gold or silver could ever match. It was called the Kotinos, and its power came not from its material value, which was essentially zero, but from its profound symbolic meaning. To where it was to be touched by the divine, to have your name forever woven into the fabric of Greek legend. The process of creating the victor's wreath was itself a sacred ritual, ensuring its connection to the gods was unbroken. On the final afternoon of the games, a young boy, both of whose parents were still living, would be chosen for this holy task. Using a golden sickle, he would cut the branches from a specific wild olive tree that grew in the sacred grove, a tree believed to have been planted by the hands of the hero Heracles himself. These branches were then used to weave the humble crowns, transforming a common plant into the ultimate prize. The moment of crowning, the Stephanosis, was the climax of the entire 5-day festival. The herald would thunder the victor's name, his father's name, and his city-state for all to hear. Then, before the cheering crowds and the statue of Zeus, the Hellenodikai would place the Kotinos upon his head. This was not merely a reward for winning a race, it was a public declaration that this man had achieved arit, that elusive concept of ultimate excellence and human virtue. The physical wreath would wither and crumble within days, but the glory it represented was eternal. A man's name was now officially recorded in the Olympic register, and from that moment forward he was an Olympic victor, a title that could never be taken away. He was no longer just a citizen, he was a living hero. Upon his triumphant return home, his city would welcome him not as a returning soldier, but as a conquering demigod. The celebrations were legendary. The poet Pindar describes how the entire city would erupt in festivities, with feasts and songs composed solely for the champion. In a stunning act of symbolic honor, his fellow citizens would sometimes tear down a section of the city walls to create a new grand entrance, declaring that a city which produced such a man needed no physical defenses. He was often granted sightsees, the right to dine for free at public expense for the rest of his life, sharing his meals with the most powerful politicians and generals in the prestigious town hall. Many city-states also bestowed enormous cash prizes, sums that could set up a man and his family for generations, but perhaps the most enduring honor was the statue. His likeness would be carved in bronze or marble by the finest sculptors and erected in the city's most sacred spaces, or even at the sanctuary of Olympia itself, among the statues of gods and heroes. These were not generic athletic figures, they were portraits designed to capture the very essence of the man who had achieved the impossible. For the ancient Greeks, this was the closest a mortal could come to true immortality. Your body would one day turn to dust, but your name, your story, and your stone image would stand for centuries, inspiring generations to come. The humble olive wreath was the key that unlocked this legendary status, proving that the greatest treasures are not those we hold in our hands, but those that are etched into memory and stone. The victor's olive wreath was a crown of personal glory, but the true prize was often power on a grand political scale. For the elite men who crowded the sanctuary, the 5-day festival was as much a diplomatic summit as a sporting event. Rival city-states used the games as a neutral stage to project their strength and prestige to all of Greece. A victory in the chariot race, for instance, was rarely just about athletic prowess, it was a blatant advertisement of wealth. Only the richest kings and tyrants could afford to breed, train, and transport the finest horses, and a win proved their city's economic and logistical might. When a Syracusan tyrant's chariot triumphed, poets like Pindar were paid handsomely to compose victory odes that praised not just the horses, but the ruler's wisdom and the city's splendor, broadcasting this message across the Greek world. Beyond mere posturing, the sacred truce created a unique window for high-stakes diplomacy. Ambassadors and statesmen from perpetually warring cities like Athens and Sparta could meet safely on this hallowed ground. The historian Thucydides records that during the games, politicians would address the massive crowds, making grand pronouncements and rallying support for military alliances or new colonies. It was the perfect platform, a captive audience of the entire Greek elite gathered in one place. A well-timed speech could secure a vital treaty or turn the tide of public opinion across multiple city-states. Even the athletes themselves were political symbols. A Spartan victory was a testament to their brutal military training, an Athenian win a celebration of democratic ideals. The entire festival became a microcosm of Greek political life, a temporary, peaceful battlefield where the real-world conflicts of the following 4 years were subtly negotiated and foreshadowed. This gathering of great minds also made Olympia a cradle of Western thought. Philosophers and teachers, recognizing a ready-made audience, flocked to the festival. Men like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were known to stroll through the crowds, engaging in spirited debates with their students and with each other. They used the athletes as living examples to discuss their theories on ethics, education, and the ideal citizen. What did the self-discipline of a champion wrestler teach us about mastering our own desires? How did the balance required for the pentathlon reflect the balance needed in a just society? The Games provided a powerful, real-world reference point for abstract philosophical concepts, making Olympia as much a marketplace for ideas as for goods. In this sacred valley, the fate of empires was debated just a stone's throw from where men raced for a crown of leaves, proving that the true contest was always about the future of Greece itself. Among the countless names carved into Olympic history, two stand apart as titans of their age: Milo of Croton and Leonidas of Rhodes. Their stories are not just records of victory, but legends of almost superhuman achievement. Milo, a wrestler from the Greek colony of Croton in southern Italy, was a figure of raw, terrifying power. He was said to have won the wrestling crown at 6 separate Olympic Games, a dominance spanning nearly a quarter of a century. His training methods were the stuff of folklore. The most famous tale describes him carrying a newborn bull calf on his shoulders every single day. As the calf grew into a full-sized bull, Milo's strength grew with it until he was reportedly able to carry the full-grown animal the length of the stadium at Olympia and then slaughter it and eat it in a single day. This points to his other legendary trait, his colossal diet. Ancient sources claim he would eat 20 pounds of meat, 20 pounds of bread, and drink 18 pints of wine in a single sitting, a diet meant to fuel his immense frame. His strength was not just for show, it was his weapon in the wrestling pit where he was known for his unbreakable grip. His end, like his life, was mythic. According to the story, an old Milo came across a tree trunk that woodcutters had partially split with wedges. Attempting to tear the tree apart with his bare hands, he dislodged the wedges and the trunk snapped back, trapping his hands. Unable to free himself, the man who had defeated all of Greece's strongest athletes was ultimately defeated by a tree and was devoured by wolves. While his death is certainly a fable, it cemented his status as a larger-than-life hero whose strength became both his glory and his tragic flaw. In stark contrast to Milo's raw power stood the sublime endurance of Leonidas of Rhodes. His fame came not from a single overwhelming skill, but from a perfect, sustained mastery of speed. Leonidas competed in and won 3 distinct events in 4 consecutive Olympic Games, from 164 to 152 BCE. This means he stood atop the victor's podium a staggering 12 times over a 16-year period. His events were the most demanding foot races of the Games. He triumphed in the stadion, the classic 1-length sprint, the diaulos, a brutal 2-length race that demanded both speed and stamina, and the hoplitodromos, the race in full hoplite armor. Imagine the sheer versatility required. The stadion was an explosion of pure acceleration. The diaulos required a runner to manage his energy around a tight turn. The hoplitodromos, however, was a test of sheer grit, a longer dash while carrying a heavy shield and wearing a bronze helmet, a race more akin to a military drill. To win all 3 at a single Games was an unprecedented feat of athletic range. To do it again and again and again was simply miraculous. It made Leonidas the most decorated Olympic athlete of the ancient world, a record that stood for over 2,100 years. His legend was one of flawless consistency, a man who embodied the Greek ideal of a balanced and disciplined body, capable of supreme excellence year after year. Where Milo represented the mythic, almost monstrous peak of human strength, Leonidas represented the pinnacle of perfected, repeatable human performance. Together, their stories show us the 2 faces of ancient glory, one forged in the fires of Herculean legend, the other carved through decades of relentless, polished victory. The glory of Milo and Leonidas could not shield Olympia from the shifting tides of history. The Roman conquest of Greece, finalized with the sack of Corinth in 146 BC, did not destroy the Games outright, but it began a slow, steady corrosion of their sacred spirit. Initially, the Romans were fascinated by Greek culture and even participated as competitors, yet their approach was fundamentally different. They saw the Olympics not as a sacred Panhellenic rite, but as a spectacular entertainment and a potential tool of power. The first major blow came from the ruthless general Sulla. In 85 BCE, locked in a bitter civil war and desperate for funds, Sulla ordered his troops to loot the treasuries of Olympia. For centuries, these sacred buildings had housed the priceless offerings of victorious city-states, a physical testament to centuries of Greek devotion and achievement. Sulla's men stripped the sanctuary of its gold and silver, melting down countless artifacts to pay his soldiers. This act was more than a theft, it was a profound desecration, a signal that Roman political needs now trumped 1,000 years of religious tradition. The games continued, but their financial foundation was shaken, and their inviolability had been shattered. The corruption deepened under the whims of Roman emperors, reaching its grotesque peak with Nero. The infamous emperor, obsessed with artistic and athletic glory, arrived at the 211th Olympiad in 67 CE with an imperial entourage of thousands. He blatantly manipulated the games to suit his ego, demanding that they be delayed for 2 years just so he could compete. He entered contests he could never win fairly, such as the chariot race, where he was thrown from his 10-horse chariot and failed to finish, yet the terrified judges, fearing for their lives, declared him the victor anyway. He even competed in musical and oratory contests, events never before part of the Olympics, and was, of course, awarded the crown for each one. His prizes were not the simple olive wreath, but lavish, politically motivated crowns. Nero's performance was a charade of victory, a public spectacle that made a mockery of the Greek ideal of arete, or excellence. He had transformed the ultimate test of human virtue into a stage for imperial vanity, proving that the games were now subject to the will of a single man, not the laws of the gods. This marked a fundamental shift from a festival of Greek unity to a Roman political tool, draining the Olympics of their original soul and setting them on an irreversible path toward oblivion. Nero's vanity was a symptom of a deeper decay, but the final blow to the Olympics would come from a far more profound transformation of the Roman world. The rise of Christianity, once a persecuted sect, now found its champion in Emperor Theodosius I. In 393 of the Common Era, this deeply devout emperor issued a sweeping decree that would silence the sacred stadium forever. His edict targeted all pagan festivals and practices across the empire, and the Olympic Games, as the most famous and enduring of all pagan rituals, could not escape his wrath. For Theodosius, the games were not a celebration of human excellence, but a dangerous and idolatrous spectacle dedicated to a false god, Zeus. They represented everything the new state religion sought to erase. The great statue of Zeus at Olympia, once a wonder of the world, was now seen as a graven idol. The athletes competing in the nude were an affront to Christian modesty. The entire festival, with its animal sacrifices and prayers to pagan deities, was an obstacle to the spiritual unity of the empire. With a single imperial command, a tradition that had run for nearly 12 centuries was officially extinguished. The sacred flame was doused, the herald's cry fell silent. The Olympic Truce, which had paused wars for over 1,000 years, was now just a memory. The last victor's name was recorded, the final olive wreath bestowed, and then nothing. The great machinery of glory simply ground to a halt, leaving the sanctuary to the encroaching silence. The sacred flame of Olympia was extinguished, and the roar of the crowd faded into a profound silence that lasted for over 1,000 years. The valley, once the beating heart of the Greek world, was slowly reclaimed by the earth. The Alpheus River, which Heracles had once diverted, now flooded its banks with seasonal indifference, depositing layers of silt and mud over the temples and treasuries. Earthquakes toppled the mighty columns of the Temple of Zeus, and the colossal statue of the god was carted away to Constantinople, where it was eventually lost in a fire. Over the centuries, the ruins were plundered for their marble and bronze, and the very location of the sanctuary became a matter of legend, its exact coordinates forgotten beneath olive groves and quiet farmland. The memory of the games lived on only in dusty manuscripts and the scattered writings of ancient historians, a ghost of a civilization that had once defined glory. The world had moved on, leaving Olympia to its long, slow burial. Its resurrection would require not athletes, but a new kind of explorer armed with shovels and a relentless curiosity. In the 1760s, an English antiquarian named Richard Chandler, funded by the Society of Dilettanti, set out to locate the lost sites of ancient Greece. Following the clues in the writings of the geographer Pausanias, who had left a detailed guide to the sanctuary written in the 2nd century, Chandler and his team arrived at a place the locals called Katophana. They found a landscape of low hills and scattered stones, with the twin peaks of the Cronian Hill rising in the distance, just as Pausanias had described. Peasants directed them to a place where a colossal statue had been found decades earlier, a headless, seated figure that Chandler correctly identified as the sculpture of Nike from the Temple of Zeus. It was a monumental discovery, a single, solid piece of evidence that proved this quiet valley was indeed the legendary Olympia, but Chandler's expedition was just a preliminary sketch. The true excavation, the one that would peel back the earth and reveal the full glory of the site, would not begin for another century, driven by a German scholar's lifelong dream. Ernst Curtius, a professor of archaeology and a man utterly captivated by Greek history, had lectured for years on the importance of finding Olympia. He convinced the German government to sponsor a major, systematic dig, arguing that uncovering this sanctuary was key to understanding the soul of the ancient world. In 1875, after years of negotiation with the Greek king, Curtius and his team broke ground. They worked with meticulous care, unearthing the site layer by layer. They did not find towering structures waiting to be admired. They found foundations, the ghostly outlines of buildings traced in stone. They uncovered the precise layout of the Temple of Zeus, its massive column drums lying where they had fallen. They found the workshop of Phidias, identified by a humble pottery cup bearing the sculptor's name. Most thrillingly, they uncovered the very entrance to the stadium, the arched tunnel through which every single ancient athlete had walked, their footsteps echoing with anticipation and fear. The German team's work was a revelation, transforming myth into measurable history. The simple stone starting lines for the footraces were exposed to the sun for the first time in 16 centuries. The bases of the Zane statues, with their inscriptions shaming cheaters, were found exactly where Pausanias had said they would be. Every artifact, from a broken discus to a victor's bronze helmet dedicated to Zeus, was a direct message from the past, confirming the incredible stories that had been passed down. The excavation of Olympia was more than an archaeological triumph. It was the reawakening of an ideal, proving that the memory of glory, no matter how deeply buried, could never truly be erased. The silence that fell over Olympia lasted for 15 centuries, a forgotten dream buried under river silt and olive groves, but an idea that potent could never truly die. It simply waited for the right person to hear its echo. That person was a French aristocrat named Pierre de Coubertin. Born in 1863, he was not an athlete, but an intellectual and an educator, haunted by the feeling that his own nation had grown spiritually weak after its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. He became obsessed with a theory that physical education was the cornerstone of building strong character in young men. His search for the perfect model led him across the Channel to England, where he admired the ethos of muscular Christianity in schools like Rugby. But it was a later journey to the archaeological sites of ancient Greece that would change everything. Walking among the uncovered ruins of Olympia, he wasn't just seeing stones, he was seeing a vision. He saw in the ancient games the ultimate expression of his own ideals, a festival where sport was not mere recreation, but a noble pursuit that could forge better citizens and foster international peace. He became consumed by a single, seemingly impossible mission: to resurrect the Olympic Games for the modern world. For years, Baron de Coubertin was a voice crying in the wilderness. He organized an international congress on amateur sport in Paris in 1894, where he finally unveiled his grand proposal. Many of the delegates thought he was a madman. They argued it was too expensive, too complicated, a relic of a dead pagan past with no place in the industrial age. But de Coubertin was a master of persuasion, weaving together the romantic appeal of classical history with a pragmatic vision for the future. He argued that the Games would be a powerful force for peace, a modern version of the Olympic Truce that could bring the world's youth together in friendly competition. His passion was infectious, and he secured a critical victory. The Congress voted to establish the International Olympic Committee and to hold the first modern Olympic Games just 2 years later. The chosen city was a deeply symbolic one: Athens, a return to the very heart of the ancient world. The path to Athens in 1896 was fraught with obstacles. Greece was politically unstable and nearly bankrupt. The Greek government itself was skeptical, fearing the cost and the logistical nightmare. For a time, it seemed the dream would collapse before it even began. But then, a wave of national pride swept through the Greek public, fueled by the passionate advocacy of a wealthy businessman named George Averof. He donated a massive sum to restore the ancient Panathenaic Stadium, a magnificent horseshoe of white marble that would host the opening ceremony. That gesture ignited the nation, and the Games were saved. On the 6th of April, 1896, King George I of Greece stood before a crowd of 80,000 people in that sun-drenched stadium and declared the Games open. 241 athletes, all men from 14 nations, marched in, not as rivals but as participants in a shared experiment. The world held its breath, watching to see if this old ghost could learn to live again. The roar of the crowd in that restored Athenian stadium signaled more than a revival. It was a transformation. The modern Games that Pierre de Coubertin envisioned are a global phenomenon, yet they carry the ancient DNA of their Greek ancestor in fascinating and sometimes contradictory ways. Consider the very nature of the competitor. In ancient Olympia, the athlete was the embodiment of pure amateurism, a man of means who trained for the singular honor of an olive wreath. Today's Olympians are the ultimate professionals, dedicating their entire lives to their sport, supported by national funding, corporate sponsorships, and the pursuit of a gold medal. That simple olive crown, the Kotinos, has been replaced by a podium of gold, silver, and bronze. Yet the modern medals awarded in Tokyo in 2021 still featured a leaf from the sacred olive tree, a direct and poignant link to the original prize. The events themselves showcase this evolution. We no longer race chariots to the death or practice the bone-snapping brutality of the pancration. Instead, we have the graceful precision of gymnastics, the strategic complexity of team sports, and the technological marvels of sports like skateboarding and surfing. The ancient pentathlon tested the skills of a citizen soldier, while the modern decathlon pushes the human body to its absolute limit across 10 disciplines. The scale is perhaps the most staggering difference. Where 40,000 Greek men once gathered in a single valley, the modern Olympics now bring together over 11,000 athletes from more than 200 nations, broadcast to a global audience of billions. The ancient Games were a celebration of Pan-Hellenic or all-Greek identity. The modern Games are a spectacle of global unity, a concept physically represented by the 5 interlocking rings. Designed by Coubertin himself in 1913, the rings symbolize the 5 inhabited continents of the world, united by the Olympic ideal. This symbol finds its perfect partner in the Olympic flame. The ancient Greeks revered fire as a divine element stolen for humanity by Prometheus, and they held torch races in other festivals. But the now familiar torch relay from the ancient ruins to the modern host city is entirely a 20th century invention, first introduced for the Berlin Games of 1936. It is a powerful piece of invented tradition, connecting the modern spectacle directly back to the mythological and spiritual roots of the ancient sanctuary. Despite these vast differences in form and scale, the core ideals remain strikingly constant. The ancient Olympic truce, the Ekecheiria, sought to pause all wars so athletes could compete in peace. The modern Olympic Charter formally promotes a peaceful society concerned with the preservation of human dignity. While the modern truce is often more symbolic than practical, its continued declaration is a direct echo of that ancient aspiration. And at the heart of it all, then and now, burns the same relentless pursuit of excellence, the ancient concept of arete. Whether it is a runner breaking a world record by 1/100th of a second or a wrestler in 776 BC straining for a third fall in the dust, the fundamental human drive to push beyond known limits to achieve something immortal is the unbroken thread that connects us across the millennia. That sacred fire which once illuminated the altar of Hestia at Olympia now circles the entire globe. Within the sanctuary's inner grove, the altars, a flame burned perpetually at the goddess's public hearth, a symbol of the shared life and unity of the Greek people. This was not a ceremonial torch, but a living, practical fire central to the religious rituals of the games. Dozens of animal sacrifices were offered to Zeus and the other gods, and the flesh was cooked over this very flame for the communal feasts that followed. The fire represented purity, life, and the divine presence that watched over the competition, a constant, flickering witness to the oaths sworn by athletes and judges alike. Its light connected the mortal struggle in the stadium directly to the celestial realm of the gods. This ancient symbol, however, would remain largely confined to its religious context for centuries after the games faded into history. Its transformation into the global spectacle we know today was the invention of a 20th century imagination, masterminded by Karl Diem, the chief organizer of the 1936 Berlin Games. Diem, inspired by ancient Greek torch races depicted on pottery, envisioned a grand relay that would physically connect the modern games to their ancient birthplace. He proposed kindling a flame using the sun's rays at the ruined temple of Hera in Olympia, just as it might have been done in antiquity. From there, runners would carry it overland across nations to the heart of the modern stadium. This was a stroke of symbolic genius, creating a new tradition that felt timeless. The ritual begins with a solemn ceremony at the very site of the ancient games. An actress dressed as a high priestess, surrounded by priestesses portraying Vestal virgins, uses a parabolic mirror to focus the sun's rays, igniting a single torch. This method, evoking the pure, elemental power of the sun god Helios, is meant to ensure the flame's purity, a fire stolen not from man but from the heavens themselves. Once lit, the flame is placed in a safety lantern and begins its long journey, a journey far more complex and politically charged than any ancient Greek could have conceived. The first torch relay in 1936 crossed 7 countries, a distance of over 3,000 kilometers, a monumental feat of logistics and international cooperation. Today, that journey has expanded to encompass entire continents, a moving symbol of the Olympic ideal traveling through the hands of thousands of runners from all walks of life. Each bearer, for their few hundred meters, becomes a temporary link in a chain stretching back through time, carrying not just fire, but the weight of an ancient dream of peace and human excellence. The flame's passage transforms ordinary roads into a temporary sacred path, a ribbon of light weaving through the modern world, forever tied to that first, simple fire on an altar in a quiet Greek valley. The echo of that ancient starting gun has never truly faded. The legacy of the Olympic Games is not merely a historical footnote, it is a living force woven into the very fabric of our modern world. Its most visible monument is the global spectacle we watch every 4 years, a direct rebirth from Pierre de Coubertin's vision, but its roots dig far deeper into our collective consciousness. The ancient Greeks gave us more than a template for competition. They gave us a philosophy of human potential. Their concept of arete, that pursuit of excellence in both body and mind, resonates in every athlete who strives not just to win but to perfect their craft. This was never about being better than someone else alone. It was about being the best possible version of oneself, a challenge that transcends the stadium and applies to every human endeavor. The modern Olympic motto, Situs, Altius, Fortius, faster, higher, stronger, is a direct descendant of this ancient ideal, a call to push beyond perceived limits. Even our foundational ideas of sportsmanship and fair play were forged in the dust of Olympia. The Hellenodic judges and the shame of the Zane statues established a crucial principle that how you play the game matters as much as the final outcome. To cheat was to insult the gods and dishonor your community, a lesson in integrity that remains the bedrock of any meaningful competition today. The Olympic spirit itself, that elusive sense of global unity and peaceful rivalry, is the modern incarnation of the Ekecheiria, the sacred truce. While our world struggles to uphold such a peace, the very attempt, the gathering of nations under one flag, is a testament to that 2,000-year-old dream of setting aside conflict, if only for a moment, in the name of a higher goal. The architecture of our aspirations, the very stage upon which we celebrate human achievement, was first laid out in that sacred valley. When a gymnast sticks a perfect landing or a runner collapses in exhausted triumph, we are witnessing a ritual that began with a single cook named Coroibos sprinting for a crown of leaves. The Olympics remind us that our drive for glory, our quest for a place in history, and our belief in the power of a peaceful contest are not modern inventions. They are a timeless part of the human story, a flame first lit in ancient Greece that we have carefully, reverently, passed hand to hand across the centuries, ensuring its light never goes out. From the treacherous chariot race of Pelops to the gleaming stadiums of the 21st century, this journey reveals an institution forged in the fires of both myth and history. The Olympics were never just a game. They were a profound fusion of raw human ambition and deep religious faith, a stage where mortal athletes became living offerings to the divine. The same spirit that drove a hero like Heracles to plant a sacred olive tree now drives a gymnast to perfect a routine or a runner to shave 1/100th of a second off a world record. This timeless quest for excellence, for a moment of immortality, is the unbroken thread connecting our modern world to that ancient, dusty track. The Games are a mirror reflecting our greatest aspirations for peace, unity, and the sheer beauty of human potential. We have carried this flame for millennia, and its light continues to inspire us to reach faster, higher, and stronger. What is your favorite Olympic story, whether from the pages of ancient myth or the unforgettable moments of modern history? Share your own piece of this epic legacy in the comments below.